Okay, so if you remember last time I was telling you about Ajahn Chah's early life and how he became a novice as a teenage boy, and after disrobing for a short time became a monk and lived in the village monasteries for a few years, and then he started off on the Tudong life and became a forest monk. And after his meeting with Rumpu Man, he had various adventures and experiences, and the last one I told you about was in the cremation ground. And following that episode, he carried on walking through the northern part of northeast Thailand, Isan. And he had another quite memorable experience when he put up his glot. You remember that umbrella that I showed you last time? And during the middle of the night there was a pack of wild dogs came and surrounded him and were all barking and very fierce and very, very frightening. And he remembers that the thought that came up in his mind was in the nature of what we call an adhitan, and this is something that he often resorted to, and in fact is a common practice of monks and Buddhist meditators. What I mean by that is he made a kind of a vow, and he said that if I've hurt or killed any of you beings in a past life, and I have a karmic debt that I have to pay off, then I give my life to you. Otherwise, please leave me alone. I want to meditate. So, and then the dogs disappeared, and they all ran off. So this is a feature of the Tudong life and walking alone in the forest. It's not always the most peaceful practice for monks, but it's one in which you are often confronted with situations that you've never met before. Quite unexpectedly, you can find yourself in danger of your life, and for that reason, it's as a monk you go through various tests of endurance and courage and mindfulness that you probably would not in a normal monastic setting. So learning great self-reliance, and when a monk has been through some frightening, difficult experiences like this, then it gives rise to a lot of self-confidence and energy in practice. Anyway, Ajahn Chah continued walking, and he made his way to a monastery in Nakhon Phanom province. Now I'm assuming that he must have heard of this monastery and the abbot of the monastery from someone on his travels. Again, quite common when Tudong monks meet each other. They often share information about where are good places to meditate, quiet places where you can go on alms round, be adequately fed, but still have solitude, or other places where there are good teachers to learn from. And the monk that he went to visit and stayed with for some while became one of his main teachers, and a monk who he maintained his relationship with until that monk, whose name was Lumpur Ginri, finally passed away in 1979. I would say it's characteristic of Ajahn Chah also that firstly that he never felt the need to stay with a particular teacher for any great length of time. And he was someone who said that when he went to stay with teachers, he didn't ask many questions, but he liked just to watch and observe and listen. So Ajahn Chah continued walking through Nakhon Phanom province, and he was making for a monastery called Wat Pa Metnawime, which is a monastery. The abbot Lumpur Kinri became one of his teachers, and a monk that he maintained his relationship with right until the Lumpur Kinri passed away in 1979. Now, when I say that he was one of Ajahn Chah's 2 or 3 main teachers, I don't mean by that he spent a great deal of time with him in his company or practicing with him, but he was someone that he looked up to and praised a great deal, and someone that obviously had a big influence on his own life. And indeed, Ajahn Chah was not someone who ever stayed with any particular teacher for any length of time, and he said that he would spend his time with teachers just listening, observing, rather than asking a lot of questions. That was his way, and he'd take what he learned and go off and put it into practice. Lumpur Kinri was a very interesting monk in that during the 1930s he walked barefoot, as far as I know, overland from Thailand to India, which is an incredible trip. You can imagine, through the jungles, very thick jungle, malarial jungles, a lot of wild animals, through Burma and all the way to Bodh Gaya and the holy places. So very tough and intrepid monk. Spent a number of years in Burma. He was away from Thailand altogether, more than 10 years, I believe. But by the time Ajahn Chah went to stay with him, he was still living in a very quiet way. He is a very gentle, sweet monk who didn't give a lot of Dhamma talks, and also with what confused Ajahn Chah to begin with, he wasn't meditating very much. I didn't see him sitting and walking many hours of the day. And so that was a kind of surprise to Ajahn Chah, that his idea of a meditation monk was someone who was doing a lot of formal meditation practice. Anyway, so something about Lumpur Kinri inspired him and intrigued him. And there was one particular incident where he was asked to sew some robes for a new member of the community, and he was sewing away in the middle of the day, very hot, and because he wanted to get it finished so that he could go and meditate. And Lumpur Kinri just walked up and asked him, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm trying to get this robe finished so that I can get back and meditate. And he said, well, what are you going to do after you meditate? I'm going to do this. What are you going to do after that? And the crux of what Lumpur Kinri was teaching him was that this is your meditation. The sewing is your meditation. And if you're sewing with the intention to get it over and done with as quickly as you can, then you're not doing it with mindfulness, and you're not practicing properly. So this kind of teaching that I would think that he would have heard before, and that you have to be mindful in all of your activities, but it's always more meanful when you're sort of caught in, just something, oh yes, I'm doing exactly what teachers already told me that I should be doing. And he was very impressed by that. Although, again, he relates other examples where this was a kind of recurring problem with him, because he had so much dedication and sincerity in meditation practice that it's very difficult for him not to see other activities as being inferior to that. Although he could see that being mindful in other activities is supportive of meditation, it still the idea that the real practice is sitting with your eyes closed. So he spent quite I don't know how many days. He never made it clear. Probably a week or two with Ajahn Ginri, and then he went off on Tudong again with the intention to return for the rains retreat in that year. Now, if you remember that Buddhist monks are forbidden from wandering around for the 3 months of the rains retreat, which begins on the full moon of July and ends on the full moon of October. So that's the time when even the mendicant monks have to find a monastery and just stay there for those 3 months. So he decided this was a place that would be suitable for him. Now, last time I mentioned a little about the two different sects, the Dhammyut sect and the Mahanikai sect. And one of the reasons why Jayasaro was attracted to stay with Lumpur Ginri, I believe, was because he was in the Mahanikai sect, so in the same sect. And a number of meditation monks, meditation masters in that sect, quite few. So he was very glad to find someone in his own group who he could look to as a teacher. So Ajahn Chah left, and at that time he still had Pakao Gel, the old man with keeping 8 precepts, who was travelling with him as an attendant. And he eventually found another small monastery where he decided to stay for a few days. And then another kind of problem arose, that there was a young woman who had come to offer food in the monastery every day, and she was a widow and she had a small child. And it was obvious that she was attracted to him. And she would, of course, there are many rules and regulations preventing women becoming friendly and to meet with monks. But she would send her son to go and spend time with Ajahn Chah and to help him do things and to create some kind of a bond and attachment in that way. And he relates that he started to feel some attraction and lust for this woman, and then one night, in the middle of the night, he just woke up and he realized that this is dangerous for me, and he woke up his attendant and they got their things together and left, like in the middle of the night, basically ran away. And I think this is also a good story in that sometimes the reason why we stay and we become compromised in our position or our ethical standards is maybe just a matter of pride. I'm not going to run away, instead of assessing just how strong you are and just what you can and cannot do. And so he was willing to do that. So I don't trust myself in this situation. This is dangerous for me and for my monkhood. And so he left.
How old? How many pansa was Ajahn Chah by then?
8 or 9, I think.
I see.
Yeah.
So still quite like in adulthood.
Oh yes. Yeah. So were you going to ask me about?
I was curious about the sources you may have used in putting together his biography.
Yes, trying to put it all together and particularly the chronology of the early years, particularly when he was a young monk, and then his Tudong years, which cover about 8 years from late 1946, early 47 until March of 54, when he established Wat Pah Pong. It's all very hazy. And there was never been any real interest in historical accuracy and keeping a record of dates and so on. And the text that I used when I was working on this years ago are restricted firstly to an early biography which was written in the late 60s by one of his monk students, and then snippets, bits and pieces of information, anecdotes from his talks which were recorded, and then interviews with monks and lay people who were present in different various situations. But it's completely inadequate, really. And the chronology of exactly what happened in which year I put together with great difficulty, and just basically thinking, well, that must have happened before that, and that must have been that year because he's in that particular province, or it's obvious that this hasn't happened yet, and so more like detective work, really. Because the monk who wrote the original biography really missed a great chance, because he was so in awe of Ajahn Chah. He was kind of quite a new student, someone who came from an academic background and then gave that up and came to live in the forest monastery. So he had certain literary skills and very, very inspired with Ajahn Chah. But at the same time, it's just unthinkable that he would sit and say, well, look, you need to be a little bit more systematic about that. You know, when exactly did that happen, and what year, and what about, you know, it's just unthinkable that he would be brave enough to subject his teacher to that kind of cross-examination. So basically Ajahn Chah just told a few anecdotes, I think just whatever came up into his mind at that moment. No sense of preparation or going through it year by year, or, you know, what were the kind of major formative influences, and could you say some more about your relationship to this monk or that monk. It's just completely sort of random, and some of the anecdotes he told are really kind of almost inconsequential. It just happened that sort of one thing led to another while they were talking, I think. But that became kind of the text for many, many years. So you know, I tried to fill that out a bit more. But so this episode with this woman, the widow, it's kind of, everybody knows this story. But I'm assuming it must have happened at that particular point in time, in that hot season before he went to Lumpur Ginris, because of things that happened in the following Pansa. But he never said so. I mean, also Ajahn Chah's Dhamma talks to monks rarely featured anecdotes from his past life, but when they did, they would usually concern his faults or his difficulties rather than his strong points. And I think as a teacher he was very skilled in reminding young monks that, you know, when I was your age, you know, I wasn't anything special, I was like you, you know, and I had problems just like you, so don't put me on a pedestal and think I've been perfect, you know, since I was a kid. Because sometimes the way that monks' stories are told, you get this idea that it's totally pure and wonderful from when they're young boys. And he said, no, I wasn't like that. And I had real struggles as a young monk. And I think most of us found that was very inspiring in a different way than hearing that he could just sit and go into all kinds of meditation states and have all these psychic powers and things. And he was well known for refusing to speak about anything like that, about his own attainments. And again, you know, as writing a biography of a teacher believed to be an arahant, and this is one obvious question, well, when did he, if is he an arahant, a fully enlightened arahant, when did he become an arahant? At what period in his practice? And did he go through all four stages sota, stream enterer, and once returner, non-returner, and then can you point to particular episodes, experiences, when you can say, yes, that was, or that was probably. Again, it's really guesswork, and there are, even amongst his disciples who do talk about this and analyze it, there's not any real consensus. So although Ajahn Chah's only been dead 10, 15 years, and his life is very much in the modern age, it's almost as if I was writing a biography of someone who lived a few hundred years ago. So all most of the information you have to sort of sieve and to take with grain of salt, I guess. And now that is particularly true. Maybe I'll go on to his other teacher before return to Ajahn Ginri. This is Luang Por Thongrat. And Luang Por Thongrat, very different kind of monk to Luang Por Ginri, although they were close friends. He was senior to him, and he is the kind of monk many people refer to as like Zen-like, in that he was very vigorous and outspoken and outrageous in his behaviour, which, of course, in Thai idiom, Thai monastic idiom, where etiquette and good behaviour is so stressed, and it really quite made him stand out. And his biography is, it has this kind of mythic elements, and you don't always know just how much you can take. He's believed to have realised enlightenment in a very short time, 6 years. This is one of the main beliefs about him, let's say. And what we do know is that he steadfastly refused to change his ordination lineage and become the Dhammayut, like most of Ajahn Mun's disciples who wanted to express their devotion to him, and by becoming part of the same lineage and formally being able to dedicate themselves as his students and disciples. But even so, he was obviously given great respect and given certain prestige in the group of Ajahn Mun's early disciples, which was unusual for someone of the other sect. And over the course of time, he became the leader of all the monks from the Mahanikai sect who looked to Ajahn Mun and his tradition. And so he was like the teacher and the leader of that group, of which Ajahn Chah was one member. Although when we call it a group, I don't necessarily mean that they met together and they identified with themselves, but it was a very sort of closely knit number of Mahanikai monks. To give you an example of his outrageous behaviour, I mean, this is outrageous by monk standards, not by lay people standards, so maybe not totally too startling. But when the monks in the morning, we go on alms round, and we walk back with the bowls full of food, which is then given up to the kitchen, and then people prepare the food for the monks and so on. It's absolutely taboo to open your bowl or to take anything out of it before you get back to the monastery. You don't have any right to do that at all. And Ajahn Mun was well known for his very strict adherence to the discipline. He could be very fierce about this. Most people were kind of afraid of Ajahn Mun. And it was a period when Ajahn Mun wasn't giving regular Dhamma talks, and Ajahn Thongrat had observed that the only time that they get a Dhamma talk is a really fierce kind of fire and brimstone talk that he liked to listen to, was when somebody had done something wrong. So so one day he on return from alms round, he I can't remember whether it was a banana or maybe a sweet potato or something, that he took it out of his bowl and walked past Ajahn Mun, which you don't do either. You don't just walk ahead of your teacher. And he walked past it, chewing on it, which was absolutely outrageous by monk standards. You just don't do things like that. And so, they gave Ajahn Mun gave a really good talk that evening. Another story. These stories have various recensions and like mythical stories that something happened, but you hear various versions of it. The other one is that they were walking in a single file in the forest, and they come across a wild pig, which is quite dangerous, wild boar. And the monks all kind of ran off into the forest or got out of the way, and Ajahn Mun was standing there, and Ajahn Tongrat, Lumpur Tongrat, who was walking behind him, strided forward past Lumpur Mun and kicked the pig, and then the pig ran off. So this is kind of idea of his kind of character, and why some people say it's like Zen-like, that kind of idea. Now, of course, the ironic thing is, nobody actually knows when Ajahn Chah met Ajahn Tongrat, where, how many times, how long. There's no information at all. All we know is that Ajahn Chah relates that the first time that he met Lumpur Tongrat, Lumpur Tongrat didn't know who he was. He wasn't a famous monk at all. And so he walked into the monastery where Lumpur Tongrat was living. Lumpur Tongrat saw him and he said, "Oh, Cha, you've arrived at last." So it totally startled him, because how could he possibly know who he was? There was just no way. So Ajahn Lumpur Tongrat and Lumpur Ginri were close, and it's possible that while Lumpur Cha was staying at Lumpur Ginri's, Lumpur Tongrat came to visit, or Lumpur Ginri took Lumpur Cha to visit him. It's possible that he was living reasonably close by, because his home village was in Nakhon Phanom, that same province. Although, interestingly enough, he went and established a monastery in Ubon during the period when Ajahn Chah was a village monk, and Ajahn Chah was studying the academic side Buddhism in that very area. So, and again, there is some information that he visited him there for the first time while he was before he became a forest monk, and that may be an initial connection. So it's all really kind of hazy and uncertain. So these two monks sort of figure a lot, at least in Ajahn Chah's recollections and the standards of practice, their personality, and he would often refer to them when he was talking to his students. So I'll go back to Lumpur Ginri again. And of course, in those days, the monks were very had to live very ascetic lives, and one difference from today is that cloth was very hard to find. And he had great difficulties in just keeping himself clothed in that time, because he wasn't living in one particular monastery, and without regular supporters and people who would offer him cloth. And it was a big worry for him as well. There was he was sweeping once, and his sabong, it's like the skirt-like robe that we wear here, was so paper thin that he was tired. He just bent down and it got a big split in it. So what can you do? And there was no cloth in the monastery, and so he found some foot wiping rag that he had to sew onto the inside of the robe. Another time he got a robe which was all ragged around the edges. Somebody gave him old robe, so he found some cloth and sewed it all around the edge of the robe. But then it looked like a hem, almost like a lay woman's skirt, where they had the two different colours. And of course, when you go on arms round, everybody would point and think it looked funny. So they got very self-conscious about that. And so this is a side of monk's life that people don't. We have very few possessions, but they can be a real worry and difficulty. And young monks can get quite obsessed with things like their bowl and their robes, and this is something that Ajahn Chah went through, and he'd tell us all about as well. So he decided that he developed a standard for himself. He had these worries, and he needed to be properly covered and reasonably clothed, and but he just made a standard that even though he still had desires for good robes and so on, that he would never ask for anybody, for anything for anybody, even from monks. Because monks are not allowed to ask for things from lay people unless they've made a specific invitation to them, or else they're blood relatives. So you can ask from your mum and dad, or from brother and sister, if you really need something. But he found that gave a sense of a lot of integrity and something that he could feel proud of, that he could maintain that standard. Anyway, he went back to Lumpur Ginri's for the rains retreat, and Lumpur Ginri saw that his robes were falling apart, and so he asked for some cloth from some relatives of his, and then one of his relatives, who was a nun in the monastery, sewed a robe for him. I think there were a number of nuns, probably all helped, because you sew by hand, and it's not like using a machine. It took a long time. And he said that robe, the cloth was very thick, and when you dye the cloth with the jackfruit dye, you remember sometimes you've seen my robes when they're newly dyed, very stiff. But this robe is so thick and stiff already, but with the colour in it as well. He said it was just like an earthenware pot. It's just so stiff. You walk along, it's so swap. But he said he was just so happy to have this robe that he didn't mind. And he said even when you put the sangati, the 2-layer robe on top, so you wear this one, the jiwan, and the sangati together on arms round, then it's even thicker. He said he wore that for 4 years. Now, in that pansa, probably the most memorable thing, and the thing talked about a lot, was it was a year when his great battle in his early monk's life came up, and that was with sexual desire. He said, as a monk, the other areas of meditation and practice never been too difficult for him, but that was his one real weakness. And some people say that he fell in love with the nun who sewed his robe for him as well, but there was nothing, possibility of anything happening there. But then during the pansa, doing a lot of meditation, it seemed like all this stuff came up, and he had great battle with it, until finally he overcame. He was having all kinds of sexual fantasies and very vivid images, you see, as a monk, and not only are monks celibate, but every possible expression of sexual energy is forbidden. So the more kind of extreme expressions can lead to what we call a sangadi sesa offense, which is the most serious offence against the discipline that a monk could commit without being expelled from the order. And if you commit that level of offence, then you have to do a period of penance, and it's all special practices, and it's quite humiliating, and it's also a real burden on the monastic community. So it is a kind of a purification that nobody wants to go through, really. But apart from that, there are very other rules which support that. So the idea being, you have with the monk's discipline, you have, let's say, like a number of walls surrounding the treasure, and so the outward walls are the minor rules. So if you keep the minor rules, which are your outer line of defences, then the enemy's never going to get into the inner walls. So with a monk and relationship to women, for instance, a monk's not allowed to be alone with a woman, or to have any conversation alone with a woman for more than 7 sentences. I mean, absolute necessary communication. And so lots of minor rules are there to support it. But what it means is there's no outlet for sexual energy at all, even quite innocent, relatively innocent. So the monk has no choice. He has to look at sexual desire as desire, as something that's going on in his body and mind, and he must learn to observe it and to see it for what it is, as something which is impermanent and not self, the cause of suffering, with the idea being that sexual desire is something that can be completely transcended, completely abandoned by the meditator.
Did Ajahn Chah relate how he overcame these sexual desires?
Well, yes, because this is when teachers are teaching young monks in their 20s and 30s, then often this is a common subject that has to be dealt with and talked about a lot. And he said basically that he didn't have any very wise and special techniques, but just a great deal of patient endurance, and just being willing to endure through that without acting upon it, and seeing it for what it was again and again and again. And so finally, at the end of this pansa, he had a real breakthrough with this, and then it was never really a problem for him after that, to the same degree. And before the end of that pansa, he had a wonderful dream that Ajahn Mun appeared before him with a beautiful jewel in his hand, and then he said, "Here for you, take it to see how beautiful, how radiant it is." Ajahn Chah took a hand. Ajahn Chah, he said, he woke up and his hand was like this in his holder. So after all these great difficulties and struggle, then he had a very, very good experience after that. So at the end of the pansa, he set off walking once more. So after leaving Lumpur Kinris, he carried on walking, another monk with him, and then there were 2 handicapped boys in a village they passed through, asked to go along with them. And so he let them go along, and sort of took care of them. And they stopped for the night on a small hill somewhere. And after making sure that the boys were set up and that they were reasonably close to him so they wouldn't feel afraid, he looked for a place to put up his glot, his umbrella. And then he remembered this old saying that he never understood: don't ever rest on an old path. Don't spend the night on an old path. And he thought, wonder why that is. Maybe just an old wives' tale. So anyway, decided to give it a try. And there's an old path running through the forest. And late that night, he found out the reason. The big tiger came. So now I know monks. I've seen tigers at some distance, but not had one come right up to me. Although I know a number of people who have. And the thing about tigers is, one, they smell really strong, so you can tell quite some time before they arrive. But the other thing that you need to know about tigers is that they'll only attack someone from the back. So if you can keep your eye on them, you're safe. I understand this to be true. So someone I know, tiger came upon him when he was walking through the forest, and he just spent the next 20 minutes just slowly, the tiger's trying to come around behind him, and he just got turning like this all the time. So in most cases the tigers are not going to attack people unless they're injured or they're too old to hunt or for some reason. So Ajahn Chah was alright, but I mean, there's nothing quite like a tiger to bring up fear. And one of the reasons why the Tudong monks have always chosen to go into places like cremation grounds, as I mentioned before, and to be in areas where there are wild animals, tigers and so on, is that one, fear is very energizing. You don't get sleepy and lazy when you're afraid. But the other reason is that fear is the indicator of just how much the sense of self still remains. It's just such a primal expression of attachment to self and body. So it's putting yourself on the spot and being able to look at certain aspects of yourself that you wouldn't be able to in other areas, other ways of living. In fact, as far as dangerous animals go, elephants are probably the most unpredictable and dangerous. There have been cases I know of monks who have been killed by elephants, but I've never heard of monks being killed by tigers. Anyway, Ajahn Chah, after a while, he'd been travelling with his companions, and he really felt the need for some solitude. And so the monk took the young boys back to the village, and they split up. And this is the first time he'd been really completely by himself. And he found a little deserted monastery to stay in, and then really started to put effort into his meditation. But he was doing a lot of walking meditation at that time, and he just went at it, in the kind of very vigorous way he did, to the extent that all his feet swelled up so badly that he couldn't walk, and so for a number of days he was just able to sit. So but his practice was developing more and more, and he was very impressed by the importance of sense restraint as a support for the practice. Because when you're meditating a lot, your mind becomes very, very sensitive, and the slightest kind of impulse can easily throw you off track. And so if you're careless with your eyes, with your ears, and you're not vetting and carefully sieving through the things that you want to receive into your mind, you can slow down the progress of your meditation quite a lot. So these are kind of basic principles that he was finding out for himself, things that I'm sure he'd read before, but were becoming clearer and clearer to him through his own practice. And okay, and this next one. From there, Ajahn Chah carried on walking, and he came to a very suitable place, quiet, not too far from the village, not too near, and he started meditating from early evening after he'd taken his bath, and about 11 o'clock at night. He'd been walking meditation for quite some time, about going to have a rest. Because usually monks would say sleep between, say, 11 and 3 or something like that. And he said he felt a little bit strange. He felt something sort of moving, something changing within him from the evening. It's not quite the same as on previous days of practice. And he decided to have a rest, and just as he laid down, put his head onto the sort of pillow, something happened. It was just like incredible jolt, like electricity going through a power cable. And it was like an explosion, and he felt like he exploded. Sorry, I'll just go back prior to that. While he was sitting, one of the experiences he had in meditation which led up to this, I'm sorry, I missed this out, was that his meditation was of a strength that there was some kind of a party on in the village, some kind of music, and he realized that in the meditative state, he didn't hear anything. He was completely aware, bright, sharp, one-pointed, but he couldn't hear anything outside. But if he decided to hear, he could hear. So this was a real discovery for him. It was quite proof that the awareness was one thing and the sound was another thing. They were separate. Like the mind, the sense of knowing, and the mental state or the mental activity were experienced as being separate, and this was a discovery for him. And so, as I said, at about 11 o'clock, lay down and he exploded, and it just went into another realm of nothingness, space. And this was completely automatic. He didn't do anything; it just happened. And after a certain amount of time, he doesn't know how long, then he came out of that state. And he said, "Tell me what was that?" And Ajahn Chah would often talk about his experiences and relate them in a form of kind of inner dialogue that he would have. One voice would say, "What's that?" And then the other dialogue would say, "It's this." Or they would have an argument or a discussion about things, and that seemed to be the way his mind worked. And so he said, "What was that?" And the other voice in his mind said, "It's just a natural phenomenon. You don't have to worry about it. It's just what it is." And so that enabled his mind just to calm down. And then the same thing happened again, but this time even more profound. And it seemed to last for a longer period of time. And he came out of that again, and once more just exploded, just suddenly projected into this new realm, new universe of emptiness, nothingness, but full of awareness, not kind of black and not a black hole, it's the opposite. And then he came out after that third time, and he said that was an experience that changed him. That he said after you've been through that kind of experience, you feel a distance between you and people who've never had that kind of meditation, and that you never feel you look at the world in quite the same way as anybody else. So it's a kind of a life-changing experience for him. Now, some people, some monks believe that was his first enlightenment experience. And in one or two books printed in the West, it's presented as that. I myself don't believe that to be the case. I believe it was just a very strong samadhi experience. And one of the reasons is because of some of the experiences and difficulties he had after that, but also in his explanation of the experience itself. I don't think it would fulfill the criteria for that kind of breakthrough. But certainly very, very deep samadhi experiences of that do change your whole consciousness of who you are, what the world is, and many very deeply held assumptions are undermined or even destroyed. So he was very strengthened by that, a lot of joy and energy in his practice coming from that. So he carried on, and he walking through the countryside, and in those days, if a Tudong monk would put up his glot near a village, often in the evening, village people would come out to offer some tobacco or to some betel nut for him to chew, or some little gift, and ask to listen to the Dhamma. And he'd always, if you remember, been very articulate and very kind of extrovert as a boy and a young man. So now that became transmuted, it becomes transformed into this great gift of teaching Dhamma, and it seems that this was a period where the Dhamma was just starting to flow out of him and become really inspiring for people to listen to. Then he crossed over the Mekong River and visited some places in Laos, and then he came back, and then he had more difficulties with his few possessions, with his bowl, and he had this bowl and it didn't have a lid, and so what you do, he needs a lid. You know, it's not like these days where you can just go to the monastery storeroom and give me a lid, please. So he thought, what can I do? And then he remembered some like weaving that he'd done and seen done when he was a boy. So he got hold of some wai, some rattan, and started to weave a lid for his bowl. And quite hard work, and he finally got this done and put it on his bowl. And he went in on arms round, and everybody thought it was a joke, and they were all laughing. Lay people were all laughing at him. And so back to the drawing board. And then he got really obsessed with this again. And again, it's a repeat of this old habit, and so he's working all through the night to make this bowl lid, and he's using some kind of candle, one of these called comb fire, using a light, and it dripped down onto his fingers. The wax, I guess. And
krang. Is it krang or wax?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. But he got all the wax and burnt his hand, and that just made him stop and say, "Look, what am I doing?" it's not such a big deal. I have to be working this day and night, and just stop. And then he put it down. He went off to walk meditation, and after a while, his mind's going back to this thing about the way to do it properly, and got to get it finished. And so went back and got into it again. And finally, just before dawn, totally exhausted, just sit to meditation before arms round, first thing in the morning. And he got a bit drowsy, and he had this vision of the Buddha. And the Buddha came and gave him a talk and told him off, admonished him. You've got it all wrong again. You're making the same mistake. You've got to learn to be able to do things one thing at a time, and don't make such a fuss about your borika, your possessions. So he said after that was just so shocking to him and so memorable that he made this real effort. It was this, if when he's sewing, when he's working, he's just going to do it for a certain period of time, then stop, and then meditate. And so when he's working, and when he's meditating, and just being able to do one thing at a time, and just to let go of everything else. And it's just so much more difficult than he thought. It was very, very hard to do, but eventually he was able to do it, and a lot of joy arose from that as well, and another kind of victory. So in spiritual life, apart from the ultimate goals of practice, it's very important to have these little small victories and things where you feel you've made real progress, and you've abandoned something, or you've developed something that you couldn't do before. Around this time he was by himself again, and he was in a very wild, lonely place, and he got very ill. He had a very serious fever, and he was lying there all alone in the jungle, and he thought he was going to die. And then he started to worry, because monks, we have these little identity books called Baisuti, and he thought, suppose I was to die here, and some hunter was to come across my body or my skeleton and find my identity book, and then were to send the news back home, and my mum was to know that I died all alone in the jungle. She would suffer so much. So I thought, I'll burn up my booklet so that nobody would know who I am. So he was just about to do this, and then suddenly he heard the sound of these barking deer. The barking deer. Yes. And it just sort of jolted him. He just, barking deer. I'm not the only sick being in this forest. What about all the animals in the forest? And they don't have medicines. They don't have doctors and people to look after them. They don't feel sorry for themselves. They make do. They just chew on leaves, and they get by. And so it was just enough just to make him sort of stop, and then he forced himself to get up off the ground and to sit in lotus position, cross-legged, and start to meditate. And he reached the point where he could just go through that illness and recovered from it. And this was again a very memorable experience, in that he proved that he could treat himself and heal himself from quite serious physical illness through the power of meditation.
I was just curious as to how often or in how much detail would Ajahn Chah actually tell about his experiences or relate incidents about them when talking to his disciples?
Again, there are two kinds of Ajahn Chah, or many Ajahn Chahs really, but he would be a lot more circumspect, speak a lot more generally when he was speaking to a large group of people, and if there are lay people present, then obviously much more vague. Speaking with monks, then maybe talk about things more specific to monks' life, and maybe relate things a little bit more detailed. But if he was speaking to monks like one-on-one and privately, then he would open up a lot more. And he was generally of the opinion that it's not a good idea to be teaching very profound subjects to people who haven't reached that level in their practice, and that it just brings up a lot of maybe craving and desire to become, to experience, and bring a lot of expectation into practice and restlessness. And that he would see what someone has achieved in their practice, and then would speak on that level to them. So again, I mentioned just now that a large amount of the information we have is from recorded Dhamma talks and just little anecdotes or even just relating that, or in such 1 year, he met such and such a monk here and there, and just piecing it together. But the recorded talks we have are themselves just a small slice of all the Dhamma talks that he gave over the years. He was the abbot of Wat Pa Phong for 25 or more years, and giving Dhamma talks on a very regular basis. But the ones that we have tapes or records of just cover a period of about 2 or 3 years, towards the very end of his teaching career. There are a few older tapes, but the majority of the ones that we have are right at the end of his teaching life. So even that source of information is very incomplete. So it's really hard to say how many things that he might have talked about in earlier years, and maybe afterwards. I know leading a monastic community, after a while, you've told all your stories, and everybody knows, your history back to front, and is a bit embarrassed about telling the same thing over and over again to people you live with. It's a bit different if you meet people you never met before and they're interested. But so I think those kinds of personal anecdotes, of which he didn't talk about himself very much. I mean, given, as I said, that the number of talks we have as a percentage of all the talks he gave is very small, but still, hundreds of hours, and there's very slim pickings, to find occasions when he talks about himself. And of course, that is the Buddhist style, not to make Dhamma presentations to kind of self-referencing, and we wanted talking about the Dhamma rather than me and my practice of the Dhamma.
So if there are a number of stories that are sort of classic Ajahn Chah stories that are used to teach things, or that you hear in sermons, for instance, I think I've heard that story about his battle with sexual desire in another one of your talks or in books. Yeah. So there's sort of these teaching stories. But I'm wondering if there are other more informal anecdotes that you might have that you've learned from in sort of interactions with him that are not. Yeah,
there are lots of Ajahn Chah stories, and most of them are from the later period of his life again, and a lot of them collected by his Western disciples. And I had something of a reaction against some of these stories, in that sometimes the effort to make something into a story somehow entails a kind of a slight distortion, and it's not completely true to one's recollection. What I mean by that is stories tend to have a kind of like a twist at the end, or some kind of a neat resolution, whereas in real life that's rarely the case. And that, even though Ajahn Chah did say a lot of sort of memorable things and sometimes very funny things, and came up with very unusual and appropriate teachings for different people, the memory of most people who lived with him over a period of years is not of those funny, wise sayings, but of a general atmosphere of training, and of the Dhamma talks that Ajahn Chah would give on a regular basis. They would be 70-80% concerned with just everyday life in the monastery, and the rules of discipline, and the looking after the kutis and sweeping the paths and keeping the toilets clean, and how senior monks should relate to younger monks, and how to be restraining senses on alms round, and not being greedy when you're taking food, and all these kind of really basic, down to earth kind of concerns. And the talks on meditation and on the higher Dhamma would be every now and again. There would be like sort of a luxury or something really special, and that you would remember. But it's sometimes the picture of Ajahn Chah that emerges is this kind of wise old man who wanders around saying marvelous things to all his disciples, and every time he opens his mouth, and it wasn't really like that. So when I say I've got a reaction against it, it's really that but that's not how monastic life feels. Living with this sparkling, radiant teacher is always giving really profound insights on things, and every time you spend a few minutes with him. But I haven't been covering much of that ground right now, because we're really on the early part of his life before he became a great teacher. So I'm more interested in pointing out some of the basic underlying themes, and that we can see being expressed in the way that he taught people, the values that he stressed, and so one thing that makes him stand out or distinguishes him from many teachers is his refusal to talk about his own attainment, even with monks. Strictly speaking, the discipline forbids monks from discussing their attainments with lay people or with non-monks, even with novices, for various reasons. One, they're not wanting people to become too obsessed with charismatic guru figures, or perhaps starting to neglect monks or monastic communities that don't have enlightened members, and so the Buddha wanting the devotion to be to the monastic order rather than to particular individuals within it. So that's already forbidden, but still, monks will often refer to it obliquely, and also the whole area around psychic powers, which many monks of this level do possess. And Ajahn Chah was certainly no exception. I think it's not just a matter of wishful thinking, or just thinking the teacher's wonderful and interpreting certain things he does and says, "Oh, that's magical and special." But there are some very clear examples which I think even the most sceptical person would have difficulty refuting. I don't think, for me, that's not so much the issue. Well, what's important for me is that Ajahn Chah would downplay this kind of stuff and not talk about it, and not try to use it as a means of inspiring people at all. He felt that it was dangerous for her to get sort of interested and involved in practicing in order to get the psychic powers. An example, again, I've asked many people first their stories and anecdotes about Ajahn Chah's life, and many of the stories they relate where they believe that he showed some psychic power. I try to put myself in the shoes of a kind of cynical person and try to look in those in a way that, well, maybe, that you could look at it like this or you could look at it like that. And I tried to find a few cases which were, I think, pretty sort of solid and difficult to refute. One of them concerns a monk who told me that he'd been working hard, or for some reason or other, he felt that he hadn't been eating enough in the past few days, and he'd had a bowl full of rice, and he was thinking to himself as he walked back to the monastery, today I'm going to increase the amount of sticky rice. And we make this, you get all this sticky rice in your bowl, and before the excess is sent to the kitchen, you make this ball and you mould it and put it in the bottom of your bowl. And so he said, I'm going to make a bigger ball of sticky rice today. I'm going to really make up for it. And so as he walked back into the monastery, he met Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah just looked at him and said, oh, so you're going to eat some more sticky rice today, are you? You're really going to pick out, are you, today? Something like that. So I would say that's a good example of one such incident where I can't see how you could explain it any other way. There are some cases where people say he read their mind, or you say, well, no, could possibly just making a general kind of statement, and this kind of rationale people have for these things. But I think that's, for me, that's a convincing one. And there are many, many, many more. But in the spirit that Ajahn Chah didn't want to stress these things, I also don't want to overemphasize these things, because they're definitely not the heart of training and meditation. In fact, they can be quite distracting. But of the psychic powers that teachers possess, that's probably the most useful one, the ability to read people's minds. And certainly if monks in a monastery believe that their teacher can read their minds, it can make them a lot more careful about what they do and think than otherwise. So whether or not it's true or not, it certainly has quite a good result. Although I remember reading how a number of monks who went to practice with Ajahn Mun ended up leaving because they couldn't control their mind. They're just so embarrassed that he knew what they were thinking about. They thought they couldn't bear to be in his presence and to think that he knew what was in their minds. So it's not always the best thing. So Ajahn Chah would talk a lot about kind of like the spirit of practice, and one of his famous more poetic sayings is like, Nibbana lies on the shores of death. Otherwise, you have to put your life on the line. You have to be willing to die for this. That's the kind of sincerity and dedication that you need. It's not something, sit for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening or something like that you're going to be able to break through in that way. I mean, monks like him are talking about 10, 20 hours a day for year after year, or something like this. It's a huge effort. But he compare the Dhamma teachings like the weapons. You're in a struggle, and so the kind of imagery that forest monks use in northeast Thailand. Again, he at that time was kind of a young man, and often the monks are young, and there's sort of a lot of imagery from like warfare and from boxing and stuff like that. So sometimes it can seem a bit become macho and over the top. But Yeah, but that's kind of warrior instinct that's very strong in the sort of forest tradition. And so he was talking about using the Dhamma as weapons, and he had a lovely simile. He said, in those days it was tough, but at the same time, you really enjoyed it. And he said it's like a particular kind of leaves, like in the forest, that we like to eat, called pega leaves. And you put this chili sauce on it. And people in northeast Thailand like very, very spicy food. And so you'd eat these leaves with a chili sauce on it, and immediately your nose starts to run, and the tears are coming out of your eyes, and that's. But at the same time, it's really delicious. So there's this two things going on. One is you're really enjoying it. The second time, your body is just going, snot's coming out of your nose and tears and everything. And so that's like practice. One part of it is just so tough and so harsh and so hard, but the other part is just wonderful. And you wouldn't want to do anything else. And and he said that. He himself found that in lonely places, in mountains and caves, and struggling and fighting, as it were, or trying to deal with all the defilements, and at the same time recollecting the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha and the things that he had achieved in his practice already, would give rise to very strong joy. And that kind of joy that arises from wholesome reflections, wise reflection, is something which will develop into samadhi, and develop very, very strong samadhi from that kind of reflection. And this was something that he experienced himself. He would stress, you have to do the practice. It's not enough to read about it or understand it. You have to, his phrase, you put your life on the line. So he carried on his walking and looking for lonely places, and then he ended up deciding to spend the Pansa in this year, that particular year. I think we're in 1948, I think now. That in a little Dhammayut monastery, so it's a monastery belonging to the other sect in the confluence. And of course, being of a different sect, there's somewhat problematic about spending a long retreat period. But they let him in, but he's always kind of like on the outside of the group. He's not totally accepted within the group. There are some kind of matters of discipline and etiquette which separate the two sects. And so one of the stories that come from this particular Pansa were connected with the sort of irony of the fact that he belonged to the sect that were considered to be rather kind of lax in the monk's discipline, and not really studying or knowing about it, and not really practicing the same way as the forest monks in the other sect. And then during the course of the Pansa, he showed them by that practice that he was a monk really worthy of respect, but also that he very politely and non-confrontationally exposed the abbot of the monastery as being really a real hypocrite. And this the incident that occurred was that they were making this khao tom, the sweet rice with the banana in it, that they make the sweet. And in the kitchen, they were grilling this these sweets. And the abbot walked by, and he noticed that nobody was watching, and they were starting to burn. So what he did was he turned them over on the grill. And while he was turning them over on the grill, Ajahn just happened to look out of his kuti and see him. Now, at the mealtime, these sweets were offered, and the abbot took some. Everyone took some, except for Ajahn who wouldn't take any. And the abbot noticed this and said, "Go on, take this, are really good." And And he just said, no, I won't. And at this point the abbot got very embarrassed and very red-faced, and afterwards he made a formal confession of his offence. So I'm assuming that most people who are watching this won't be able to understand the story, so I'll explain it. Monks can only eat things which have been formally given into their hands, as you know. And that means that monks make themselves helpless, that they always have to have some kind of relationship with lay Buddhists who are going to provide them with food. It means that they can't just help themselves to anything. It forces them to be very restrained. And so a question comes up. Let's say there's some food here and you intend to offer it to me, but you haven't given it to me yet, and I pick it up and eat it anyway. Okay, that's an offence against the discipline. But in the case that I pick something up, but I don't actually eat it, and I put it down again, is that an offence or not? Now most monasteries have particular protocol concerning this this case, and for instance, in Wat Pom, if a monk was to pick something up out of carelessness or mistake, then if he merely touched it, then he would not be able to eat any of that food, but other monks would if it was properly offered afterwards. Whereas if he picked it up and moved it, then no monk can have it, and all the food has to go to the novices. And this would happen sometimes. I mean, I've experienced this with something kind of delicious, and then a monk's picked it up, and no monk can eat that food on that day. It's considered not proper for monks. So when the abbot came along, he turned over the sweets. He said, well, that makes sense. They're burning, and I don't want them to burn. But the fact that he did this without telling anybody, and then didn't have it, then still accepted himself afterwards, means not only did he do something that was wrong, but he concealed it. And this is probably more of an offence than touching it or doing, which seems very minor. But in monastic communities, there's no kind of police force to make sure everybody keeps the discipline. It's an honour system, and especially the senior monks have to be a good example. So if you have someone who's deceiving others and not being honest about his behaviour and his conduct, things like this, out of desire to eat something sweet, then it can be really disruptive in the whole monastic community. So this is an example of, I said earlier on that the information we have about Ajahn Chah's life is very patchy, but because this obviously stuck in his mind, I think because he was a monk of the sect that was kind of looked down on, and then it turned out that ones that were maybe a little bit arrogant, and we're kind of holier than thou, turned out to be not what they were claiming to be. But this stuck in his mind enough that 20 years later, he told the monk, and it went into a book, and it became one of the sort of the official parts of Ajahn Chah biography. Whereas, in actual fact, not a big deal really, but there's something that he felt like telling. So, adjoining this monastery was a cremation ground, and that's where Ajahn Chah would spend most of his time sitting and walking. There's a little pavilion there, and he liked to meditate there. And then as this strange thing happened, he was sitting one day, and this crow came in and landed in front of him and put three blades of grass onto him, and then flew off. Kind of weird. And then 3 days later, a small child was born into the cremation ground, died of a fever. And then sometime after the the funeral cremation had taken place, this crow came back and then put some blades of grass down in front of Ajahn Chah, looked at him and flew off. And then the brother or the sister of the child who died was carried in. And this happened a third time. And it was a whole family. And Ajahn Chah just sit there and watch the family as they dwindled, and the children dying one by one, and the grief and the tears. And so, with his mind being very quiet and very peaceful, and reflecting on the truths of life, of old age, sickness and death and suffering, and these kinds of topic with a mind which is very bright. And so it's not like depressing. If it's depressing, it's not meditation. The mind has to be very, very bright and clear and happy before you can reflect on these kind of subjects for a while. But it gave rise to this very strong emotion that in Thai we call Salot Sangwe, and there's not really an English translation of that. And I think even in Thai people don't really fully grasp what it means. But I translated it before as a sober sadness, and it's not like being sad in a normal kind of way, but there's a stillness and a peacefulness about it, a very profound kind of sadness. And so seeing those truths of old age, sickness, death, separation, and what could be more moving than the parents losing their children, and so that was something that really brought up incredible amount of energy in his practice. So it's sitting and walking with great effort through the rest of that process. So he had very strong nimittas and visions of sick, dying bodies and decaying bodies, which are very powerful aids on the path of meditation. But even so, he found he'd come to a bit of a block in his meditation, and so he decided to go and visit one of Ajahn Mun's disciples who was living alone on top of a mountain reasonably nearby to where you spent that retreat. And so he climbed up to visit this teacher, and he told him that Ajahn Wang, his name was, on a mountain called Pulanka. And he said, in my meditation, I reached this point where I feel I can't go any further. It's similar to coming to the edge of a cliff, and I can't go any further, or else like on a bridge, and the bridge is sort of broken in the middle, and I don't know how to go beyond that. And Ajahn Wang explained that this was like a matter of perception, or of a nimitta or whatever, and he said these kinds of images, perceptions, so on, are endless, and they can take any kind of form. And he said, I'll give you an example of something from my own meditation. One day I was walking meditation up and down, and then suddenly I found myself as if I was sinking down into the ground and walking deeper down. And then I reached a certain point, and then my body started to come up. It went right up into the air and then exploded. My body exploded, and I could see, I was aware of all my innards, all my intestines hanging from the trees. And he said that's an example of the kind of thing that can happen. And it's almost anything can appear as that kind of vision. And so it doesn't really matter. The point is that you maintain this sense of awareness and acceptance, and then whatever appears in that way changes by itself. You don't have to do anything about it. You should maintain that sense of knowing of equanimity, of looking, of clear-sighted, interested in what's happening, and then the phenomena changes by itself. And this was a very helpful teaching for Ajahn Chah. And they talked about various things. We spent 3 nights with Ajahn Wang and practicing very hard. And then he left Jamban and walked down the hill. And he came to a little sala or pavilion at the foot of the hill. And he walked in there, and he had this very strong experience where he said it was as if everything lost its solidity. You see, like a kettle wasn't a kettle anymore, a spittoon wasn't a spittoon anymore. It was just that was just like a conventional reality. You could see it as elements or just things arising and passing away. If he wanted to see it as a kettle, he could. If he didn't, it would just be awareness that kettle was just a conventional designation and name for this for this phenomenon. And then he brought that inside and looked at his own body and mind in the same way, and was able to carry on the insight into his awareness of his own 5 khandhas, or his own body and mind. And this was a major breakthrough for him. And so he said, you can practice by yourself and you can progress, but it just saves so much time if you can see a teacher who can just put you right. It can just save you so much time. So again, this is a controversial subject, but I tend to think that if there's any particular event and experience which we could say correspond to his first enlightenment experience, then I would say that would be it. So that's my personal opinion. So anyway, he left and started walking southwards to Ubon, and he stopped off in a place in what is these days Yasothon province, where he knew some of the villagers. He passed through there before, spent some time there, and then he went down to his home village, Bangor, and while he was there, he gave a number of talks to lay people, and many of his family members came, and this was very fulfilling for him. And since the time of the Buddha himself, it's been pattern for monks who've had some kind of realization, some kind of understanding, to want to share it with their family, and particularly mother and father. Of course, you remember Ajahn Chah's father had passed away, but Ajahn Chah really wanted to help his mother to progress in Dhamma. And by this time, he had his first disciples. In the village in Yasothon, a young teenage boy had joined him as a disciple, and another one in Bangor. So he had 2 teenage boys that ordained as novices and became his first sort of monastic disciples. And from there he walked another, 40-50 kilometers to a village called Watsun Glue, which is now the site of a branch monastery, Wapapong, and he spent the Pansa there. Now, while he was at Watsun Glue, he had a number of dreams, and dream analysis is not a big deal in Buddhism, as you know. But it was interesting that many years later, in 79 or 80, some of the Western monks at Nanachat decided to go and interview Ajahn Chah and try to fill in all these gaps in his biography and do a proper biography. So they got a brand new tape player and all this kind of, stocked up with loads and loads of cassettes, and went off to visit him and stay with him for a few days and sort of pump him dry of all the information. And he wouldn't say anything at all. Just completely uninterested in the project. And the only thing that he said was he remembers when he was a young monk, he really liked to eat Chinese noodles. And there was the time when in the village monastery where he still used money. He wasn't very strict about that. And sometimes I'd have a meal in the monastery, and then I'd sneak out into the village and have some Chinese noodles afterwards. I was so hungry and so greedy in those days. But that was it. That was all he said. But the one thing he did say, one question he did answer was, the monk said, is there any one particular episode, one particular thing in your, which you think is like the most important in your biography? And they were really stunned when he said, yeah, the dreams I had, Sun Glue. So, and these dreams are not, they're, well, okay. I mean, the first one is that he gets an egg and he throws the egg down to the ground, and there are two babies, and then they go into these two small boys, and one's called Bun Tong, one's called Bun Tam, and then I think Bun Tong dies, or I can't remember exactly the details, but Bun Tong's out of the picture. He does it, and Bun Tam is the one that grows up, and so that's maybe. Like Bun Tong's, maybe it's like wealth and worldly success, and Bun Tam's like Dhamma success. Maybe that's what that one means. The second one is that he was pregnant, and just like a woman, and he got bigger and bigger, and then he gave birth to a child, and then monks came and chanted, and it sounded just like a normal kind of birth out in the forest, out in the rice fields. So. Again, I mean, he didn't ever give any interpretation. Possibly that might be sort of the birth of the Dhamma or enlightenment experience. And then the third one is that he's on the top of a mountain, very beautiful, and a winding path of the mountain, and his mother and a number of relations and family members come to offer a meal to him. So there again, I mean, speculation that might prefigure his invitation to establish a monastery outside his home village. But even so, it's still surprising that he would consider those the most important thing from his biography. So after Sun Glue he left, and by this time he was by himself. He went down to Bangkok. It's about 1950 by now, and he visited one or two monasteries, and then he went to Ayutthaya, which is the ancient capital of Thailand. And one of the ancient monasteries there had been taken over by a Dhammayut Ajahn called Chalue, and they had some kind of connection, I don't know from where. And he ended up spending 2 pansas, quite a long time at that monastery. And we know very little about that time. It seems that he'd had some significant developments in his spiritual life, and this was a place just to sort of stabilize it and to develop it further, and a place where not wanting to travel around, just a sort of a stable, quiet place in which he could live and practice amongst other meditators. One thing we do know is he got very ill and developed this very painful swelling in his left side, and seriously ill. And he decided finally, after taking medicines and not getting better, I think he did take some herbs and so on, he decided to use a Dhamma medicine, again what we call Dhammosop. So he didn't eat for 8 days, just drank water. He didn't sleep for 8 nights. He just meditated for 8 days and nights. And he cured himself. So boys and girls at home, don't try this. It's somebody, something for people who are already very well developed in practice. But again, this incredible kind of dedication and toughness that he had. And so he left there eventually, and then returned to northeast Thailand once again. And he went to stay in that near that village I told you about in Yasothon, about Dao. And this was the first time he had a community around him. He had the novice from before, and 1 or 2 monks came along, And so he became, for the first time, he was like a teacher in a formal setting. And he set a very austere kind of regimen. And life was tough anyway, but they practiced all through the night, every night through the rains retreat. And for you couldn't lay down. You could either sit or you could walk. And so they say we've got to get rid of these ideas of day and night. It's just practice. And so the people who lived with him, they had that kind of faith in him and that dedication. Most of them stuck with it. And after one pansar of leading the community, he stayed on, and then the next year he went off on solitary retreat just a couple of kilometers away. I left another monk who he trusted called Ajahn Owen, as his deputy, and he would come every patimokkha twice a month for the recitation of discipline and give a pep talk. And so the monk said it was like these plants that hadn't been watered, they start to sort of wilt and then on patimokkha he would come and give a talk and they'd get all fired up again. And then that pansar, not only did they have to stay up all night, but he said for the third month they had to keep one posture. You had to either walk all night or sit all night. So really pushing himself and pushing other people. And he was experimenting with things like fasting. He didn't find useful for himself. It didn't suit his character. He tried drinking urine for a while to see what that was all about. And so he's always sort of trying things out. Then he had very serious toothache. His teeth were all rotten, and again he tried to deal with that with meditation. And so the idea is that you have two strategies with that kind of pain. One is you have a kind of samadhi where you can just go off into a different kind of realm where you're not conscious of the pain, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. But but apart from that, coming out of that and using vipassana to investigate painful feeling as something that arises and passes away, is not self. And so alternating is the ability to calm the mind, be very still and free from pain, and then the ability to look at pain and learn from pain. And this was something else he also experimented with. And then finally at the beginning of 1954, and there was a little deputation from his home village, his mother and brothers, sisters, relations, friends, and they said, we would like to invite you to establish a monastery in the Bapong forest, which is a really big forest, just 2 or 3 kilometers away from the village, and they felt that would be a very suitable place to establish a monastery, and been a place where Tudong monks passing through that area would often put up their glots and stay. And he decided, it was time for him. So obviously he'd had the kind of experiences and the development in his practice where he felt spiritually he was ready to take on some kind of responsibility and teaching. He started off on after a period of solitude and quiet, and he started off with a very small community up in Yasothon for a couple of years, and now he's ready to take the next big step, which is to establish a monastery. And so that signalled the end of his Tudong years and the beginning of his life as now